Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we are diving into a really fascinating biological mystery, sex determination. We're going to explore exactly how nature codes for life. We'll start with some wild microscopic discoveries made way back in insect cells, trace that all the way to our own human genetics, and then we'll wrap up with the absolute mind-bending paradox of the honeybee. It is literally an incredible story of biological engineering, so let's get right into it. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with a scientist named Henking and his mysterious X body, then break down the difference between autosomes and sex chromosomes, figure out human sex determination, and finally tackle that honeybee paradox I just mentioned.
All right, part one. To really understand this whole mystery, we actually need to time travel back to the late 19th century.
Picture this, it's 1891. Long before we were mapping the human genome, scientists just had to, look really closely at things through microscopes. A scientist named Henking was observing insect spermatogenesis, which is just a fancy biological term for the process of sperm development. And he saw something super unusual. As the cells divided, this one specific nuclear structure only went to half the sperm, literally a 50-50 split. Half got it, half didn't. He couldn't fully explain what it was at the time, so he gave it a very sci-fi name, the X-body.
Well, spoiler alert, that unexplained X body was later proven by other scientists to actually be a chromosome. And since it was directly involved in determining sex, they kept Henking's letter and officially named it the X chromosome. That discovery was the absolute game changer for unlocking how the mechanics of sex determination actually work. Moving on to part two, let's see how this discovery builds into nature's broader genetic rulebook. Once they found the X chromosome, scientists had to categorize everything else. So, to keep it simple, we split our genetic material into two camps. The specific chromosomes directly involved in determining an organism's sex, those are your sex chromosomes. Everything else, all the remaining pairs handling the everyday treats of the organism, those are called autosomes. Make sense? Now, nature basically operates on two main systems across different species, and it all comes down to who produces different types of reproductive cells, or gametes. In biology, we call this heterogamety. In a male heterogamety system, the males are the ones making two different types of gametes. For example, grasshoppers use an XO system, meaning a sperm either has an X or it just doesn't. Humans use an XY system, so sperm carry either an X or a Y. On the flip side, we have female heterogamety. That's where the females produce the two different gamete types, like the ZW system we see in birds. To give you a clear visual anchor for these systems, humans and fruit flies, which biologists call Drosophila, they use that XY male system. The female has a matching XX pair, and the male has the mismatched XY pair. But look at birds. They use that fascinating ZW system. The male is actually the one with the matching set of ZZ chromosomes, while the female is the one carrying the dissimilar ZW chromosomes. Pretty wild, right? Okay, part three. Now that we've got the overarching rules down, let's zoom in on us. Let's see exactly how this XY system works in human beings. For humans, the magic number is 23. We have exactly 23 pairs of chromosomes in our cells. 22 of those pairs are identical in both males and females. Those are autosomes we talked about earlier. It is that single final pair of sex chromosomes, XX for females and XY for males, that holds the complete developmental code for determining sex. Let's walk through the actual biological steps of how this plays out. Because human females are XX, every single ovum or egg they produce is naturally going to carry an X chromosome. There's no other option. But when male spermatogenesis occurs, that XY pair separates. That means 50% of the resulting sperm get an X chromosome and the other 50% get a Y. Since the female's ovum is always bringing an X to the table, that 50-50 split of the male's sperm is literally the ultimate deciding factor during fertilization. So the absolute crucial biological takeaway here is this. It is the male's sperm, not the mother's ovum, that determines the sex of the offspring. If an X-carrying sperm fertilizes the egg, the zygote is XX, a female. If a Y-carrying sperm fertilizes the egg, the zygote is XY, a male. It's really that straightforward. And I really want to emphasize this point, because understanding this specific genetic mechanic completely busts a widespread and deeply unfair societal misconception. Historically, women have unfortunately been blamed, ostracized, and ill-treated for giving birth to female children. But biology tells us a completely different story. Women are quite literally not genetically responsible for the sex of a child. That variable is entirely determined by the genetic makeup of the father's sperm. All right, moving into part four.
Just when you think you've got all these neat little genetic rules figured out, biology throws a curveball. Let's look at the honeybee. Honeybees use a highly unique system called haplodiploidy, and the difference between the sexes is staggering. Female bees, so your queens and your workers, they develop from standard fertilized eggs. They're diploid organisms, meaning they carry a full set of 32 chromosomes. But the male bees, known as drones, they develop from completely unfertilized eggs. It's an incredible process called parthenogenesis. Because they have zero genetic input from a sperm, they are haploid. They operate on exactly half the genetic material, just 16 chromosomes. Now, think about what this means for their reproduction. Because these male drones only have half the normal chromosome count to begin with, they actually can't undergo meiosis to make their sperm. Meiosis would have the chromosome number again, and you can't have half of a 16 chromosome set here. So to ensure they pass on a complete set of their 16 chromosomes, they bypass the usual biological steps entirely. They have to produce their sperm through standard mitosis instead. Which brings us to a massive, brain-bending riddle for this explainer. Based on the exact genetics we just walked through, how is it logically possible for a male bee to have a grandfather, but no father? Let's do the generational math of unfertilized eggs here, because it actually perfectly resolves the paradox. Since a male drone comes from an unfertilized egg, he receives no genetic material from a male, so he has no father. However, the drone's mother, the queen bee, she developed from a fertilized egg, which means she definitely had a father. Therefore, the drone has a grandfather. And following that exact same logic, male bees can pass traits to their daughters, meaning they can eventually have grandsons, but because they never contribute to the unfertilized eggs that make males, they can literally never have sons. It's a complete marvel of genetics. But it leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought, doesn't it? If a single unfertilized egg can just completely rewrite the rules of inheritance for an entire hive, what other bizarre genetic mysteries are out there just waiting to be uncovered in the natural world around us? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this deep dive into the hidden rules of life leaves you super excited to discover even more.